In 1938, two renowned Polish Yiddish actors stepped ashore. They united the Melbourne Yiddish theatre ensembles that had come before them and named the new troupe after their mentor and friend, the legendary Yiddish theatre director David Herman.
Auf dem Weg steht ein Baum, steht reingebogen. Alle Vögel von dem Baum sind sich zu fliegen. 3 Kind Meirev, 3 Kind Mizrach und die Rest kein Dorem. Und dem Baum gelost allein, und fang Sturm. Sag ich zu meiner Mama, Herr, soll's mir noch nicht sterben, weil ich Mama 1 und 2 bald der Vögel werden. Ich will mir sitzen auf dem Baum und ich will ihn verwiegen, über den Winter mit der Trost, mit der schönen Nigen. Oh.
No?
Oh, I'm exhausted. They make you work hard, you know?
I'm sure.
Repeat and repeat and repeat. Be prepared.
I'm Arnold Zabel. I'm a writer, a storyteller, and Yiddish theatre has been a part of my life since childhood. One memorable night in the winter of 1958, I was 11 years old. I made my way with my parents, the 4-block walk through Shtetl Carlton. The crowd was making their way to this great citadel of culture, the Kadimah, which was lit up. Well, as you can see or hear, right on cue, the rain has broken out and is pounding on the tin roofs of the Kadimah. And here I am sitting in a tiny space, which is actually the last living remnant of what was once the great Kadimah stage in the heyday of the David Herman Theatre. Here in the building, we're in 1933, purpose-built for the Yiddish-speaking community. Yiddish theatre appeared on this stage, which is gone.
I think the most difficult role I had was the dibuk. That was physically difficult, you know, with that screaming with my voice and all that. I felt like, how dare you to do it? After all, I'm not a professional actor. To play Leah, this is such a responsibility. I felt so tense and nervous about it. Trying my best, and when I just had a note of Waislitz, that was a great thing for me.
The dibuk, of course, is the great play of the Yiddish theatre repertoire. It goes back to 1920, when it was first performed by the Vilna troupe. And Jacob Waislitz, one of the great Yiddish actors and arguably the founder of the David Herman Theatre, was one of the original cast.
Well, I remember going to the Kadimah in Lygon Street. In summer it was hot and humid inside and quite unbearable, and a very eager anticipation with all people to hear their favourite stars there.
The actors in Poland who had performed on a regular basis became stars and acclaimed by the Yiddish-speaking communities. And so the Melbourne David Herman Theatre Group became alive when Holzer and Jacob Waislitz in particular came to Melbourne.
During the war years, at the Kadimah, when they did a concert, early 40s, that there were over 500 or 600 people came to the Kadimah in Logan Street to see the performances. So they really gave it a fillip when those two folks, Waislitz and Holzer, arrived.
Well, they were regarded as big stars in Europe. And the community here couldn't believe their luck, if you like, that these two stars finished up here and living here in the end.
Es fällt mir gut nicht. Doch ich bin so einsam. Von Taten weiß ich gar nicht. Und von meinem Kind.
As a kid, it was magic being surrounded by these characters who seemed to be talking 9 to the dozens, and the women were perfumed and dressed for a night out, the men in suits and gabardine overcoats. Everyone seemed to be so excited. They were like kids. Then they'd enter the hall and the lights would go down, the band would strike up, and the magic would begin. Maria Brocklin at the piano. From memory, there was clarinet, violin and drums. At that point, the whole hall was transformed into something else. The audience fell into a kind of an enchantment. And then the full curtain opens, the Gravedigger's hovel lights up, and we see the next 2 hours, a typical village play, in a way. It was David Pinsky's The Treasure, Der Oitzer. One of the great plays of the Yiddish theatre repertoire, actually. The Village Idiot is played by Moshe Potoshinsky, and his real-life wife, Mila Waislitz, is his sister in the play. And in the final scene, you see the Village Idiot holding the lantern as the whole cast, all the shtetl characters, follow him around the stage. And Potoshinsky, as the Village Idiots, intones, "Kum, alle lomel suchen, kum, alle lomel suchen, come everyone." You see them in their greed and their need, desecrating the stones as they search for the treasure. The play ends, the lights go up. We go out through the front door of the Kadimah, and what do we see as we step out? We see the cemetery. And my father says to me, it's approaching midnight. The corpses are rising from their graves in their shrouds. They call this Trias Mason, the gathering of the souls. Now, it was only later that I discovered the story within the story. Mila Waislitz was the daughter of Yankov Waislitz. In 1919, he and his wife Yachavet had joined the Vilna troupe. At one stage, they had their children, Mila and little David, on the road with them. And in 1932, Moshe Potoshinsky, a young cabaret actor, joined the troupe and fell in love with Mila. And they eloped, and they became a cabaret duo. And they performed all over Europe. In 1940, the Nazis invade Belgium, where they had founded a folk theatre. In 1943, they are betrayed, interned in a camp in Belgium, the Linus camp, and then April the 19th, 1943, they arrive in Auschwitz. Left, right, slave labour or death. Mila ends up in Auschwitz, Birkenau. Her hair has been shorn. The women are hysterical. They don't know where they are. And they say to her, perform. And Mila says, what? Here? They'd recognise it despite the shaven head. Meanwhile, in Auschwitz III, otherwise known as Gunamonovich, Moshe Potoshinsky could not believe where he was. He was in hell. Several weeks later, he was with a slave labour mate carrying some heavy timber. Well, both of them began reciting in unison the first lines of the Dibuk. Why is it that the soul has fallen from the highest heights to the lowest depths? Maybe it is for the hope of redemption, for the ascent. And it was then that he decided that he would perform. They met again after the war, and they teamed up again, and they travelled throughout Europe, but there was something different about them. They were the wandering graduates of Auschwitz, Their performance was imbued with an intensity that they did not have pre-war. And the audiences of survivors, audiences in displaced persons camps, they saw on stage reflected their own suffering and their own longing for a world that had now vanished. Moshe and Mila arrived in Australia in 1947. They were welcomed at a banquet here in the Kadimah. And on that winter's night in 1958, when I saw Mila and Moshe perform, I could feel that deep passion and love for Yiddish theatre tinged with that edge of tragedy.
Soll jetzt unser Alter liegen, in a Cholem uns verwiegen, und zusammen lo mir träumen, Chotsch ein Schau, und mir wollen sich der Mannen von verbrachte Tag zusammen und erzählen von die Tag verbrachte dort.
I'm Joe Teagle, Yossel Teagle. My father, Shia Teagle, was a stalwart of the David Herman Theatre here in Melbourne. He was born in 1919 in Warsaw. His mother died 4 weeks after he was born, so he was brought up by his grandparents. He went to Cheder and he learnt to Doven and what have you, but then probably about age 7 or 8 he went to Skiff and was enrolled in the Tischerschule, which was the Bundesschool in Warsaw. He had very renowned Yiddish teachers, so he was an expert in the language and a reader of Yiddish, but his passion soon became the theatre. And as a young man growing up in Warsaw, this would have been the early 30s, he set his goals to be a professional Yiddish actor in the young Yiddish troupe. So the youth theatre was his gateway to becoming a professional actor. But of course, the war broke out in 1939 and he soon found himself in the Warsaw ghetto, where again he was doing what you would call theatre on the run, setting up stages in Stibbles, performing cabaret, performing art house theatre, improv and other short pieces to keep, I guess, himself sane and those around him as part of the experience of living in the ghetto. So the story of my father's survival, as I understand it, was that he left the ghetto before the uprising. He was taken by the Germans as they advanced through different towns. Because he was in the theatre, he knew how to use electrical equipment and he would wire up intercoms and lighting for the Germans during a period in probably late 1943. The earliest that I understand he was performing theatre again in a serious fashion was in the displaced persons camp after the war in Salzheim. This is where he met my mother, and this is where he set up Yiddish theatre in that displaced persons camp. My parents' experience after Salzheim was to move to Belgium. That was a very restorative period for my parents and their cohort. I particularly loved this photo. This just shows young people living their life. This is my father, my mother, and Yannick Levin on a balcony in Belgium. They would tell me stories of sitting there, sipping their tea and their wine, on Yom Kippur having their cake while the Hasidim walked past, which they thought was a hoot. But I really loved the spirit of these people rebuilding their lives. My father and Yannick Levin were very, very close, even when they were living here in Melbourne. They acted together. They were brothers to each other when they did The Death of a Salesman in Yiddish. And my father was very upset when Yannick went to live in Los Angeles in 1965. They wrote to each other often and sent each other tapes where they would talk to each other.
Can you remember the first time you met Jacob Waislitz?
Absolutely. Absolutely. He arrived, I think, from Canada. I'm not sure, but I think from Canada. You know the name Yasser Shah? Okay. Was a close friend of mine. Him, myself, and Shia Tigil. We went to pick him up to the boat, to the ship when he arrived. That was the first time I saw Jacob Waislitz. And right away, maybe within a week, we started rehearsing. The 200.000 in Shalom Aleichem. And this went on for years. We did that play for so long. And I said to Vais, I think I'm too old for that part. He said, you can still play. It was beautiful because it's contemporary. It's always contemporary. If you know the story about the guy has a dream of winning the big lot, and he wins the 200,000. And what happens? He loses it all anyway. But everybody has a dream. Everybody buys a ticket. Death of a Salesman was the last play I did with Waislitz. I think that was the most powerful thing we did. Although we had very successful plays apart from that. This was big, I think, for another reason. First of all, when the idea came up to do Death of a Salesman, I went to see the movie with Frederick March. After I saw that, I came back and I said, hey, we ain't playing that. You guys are crazy. You're committing suicide, playing Death of a Salesman. How are we going to do it? And we did it without the curtain, with lights. And the guy that did the lights was an Italian. My dear close friend. He was like my younger brother. We were neighbors. And he came with me to the theater. He didn't understand a word of Yiddish. Harold Capocassa was his name. And he did all the lights without one mistake.
Why did you think it was suicide?
Because Waislitz alone couldn't do it. I think at that time he was a sick man. And we were afraid. He couldn't carry that thing. But Holzer was there. And we said, only if they both lived together. But they didn't speak to each other for years, like enemies. Not a word. As if they didn't know each other. They worked together in Poland before the war, they knew each other. They were on first name basis. We got them together. And if Holzer's in it, that's a different story altogether. We have two giants. And it was good. It was... I'll give you a scene at the end. 1964. I worked in a fur factory. I was a farrier. And I had a lot of responsibility. I used to go to the last 2 or 3 weeks of rehearsals, or practically every day. So I used to go to the Kadimah straight from work. And a couple of times I came back to the store, finished off a job. And I remember walking in the street thinking to myself, something's got to give. I cannot afford to jeopardize my family. And this was one part in the decision-making about leaving for the United States. Because I knew as long as I'll be in Australia, I'll have to play. Waislitz came to me, to my house, one day for a tiny role. He had to have me. He spoke to her, remember? I cannot put it on without him. Some stupid little part, I don't know why he wanted. So this was the situation. I didn't regret for 1 minute that I left. Even though I walked the streets in the beginning and I cried because I missed my friends.
So this photo I really like because this shows this group of ultimately mostly Holocaust survivors excitedly arriving in Australia. So this photo would have been taken most likely around 1950-51. Obviously that's my father standing there, entertaining the crowd. And the other one that's waving his hand in the air is Yannick Levin. There was a competitiveness with Yasha Sher, but I don't believe with Yannick.
The Wandering Stars. I was sick. I was so nervous. And then when we began, I went out into the street, and when I ran in, I don't think I touched the floor. I was flying. This goes away from you. The nervousness has with some magic.
My name is Liebe Rosham. I was Liebe Zucker, and this is my mother, Leah Zucker, or Leah Zucker, an actress in the David Herman Theatre Group. It was a struggle for her sometimes, and before a performance she was very nervous, so I felt nervous too. So when we used to sit in the Kadimah and the lights would go down and Mr. Tillich would be running around with his camera and Miriam Rochlan was front stage banging on the piano, I would be quite frightened actually, till the end when it was all over and the curtain closed and somebody came out with a big bunch of flowers, then I was happy. She was a good actress because she used to take on a character. She would just make them a little bit different so that they'd be memorable. And I liked watching all the other actors because I knew them so personally. They used to come to the house and they were like family to me. So I loved to watch Helen Jacobs. She was just beautiful on stage. She could sing beautifully. I understood every word she said. I enjoyed watching Yasha. He was like an uncle to me, and I loved watching him and Mum together. I was a bit in awe of Mr. Waislitz. He frightened me a little bit. I came home from school once and opened the door and he was chasing my mother around the kitchen table, and they both said, "Oh, we're just rehearsing, we're rehearsing." So I got out of there quick. Well, that's a photograph of most of the troupe. You can see that they were all very happy together and they all loved Heike, as I called her, Helen Jacobs. There she is there with her arm around Yasha.
I was born in Poland in a town called Kalisz in 1931. My father was very much involved in the theatre. He used to play, and my mother as well, but he was the leader. He was the regisseur and the leader of the theatre in Brest-Litovsk, also in Kalisz before. And the Germans occupied Poland. They divided Poland in two parts, and we happened to be in the Russian part in the town of Brest-Litovsk. The Russians, as soon as they came into our town, started arresting the leaders of all the political organizations. And my father was one of the first being arrested. That was 1939. Well, that was the last time when we heard or seen my father again. All the families of the arrested people were sent to different parts in Russia. We were sent to Siberia, and that's where we spent 6 years during the war. I loved my school years there. I was always picked to play in plays and to recite and to sing. Theatre was always in my blood. I remember that. I remember performing on the theatre when I was about 5 years young. It was a concert from my kindergarten. And my father was so anxious that I should be doing the right thing that he went into the prompter's seat. You remember those old-fashioned little booths in front of the stage? And my father got into that, and he was sitting there looking at me when I was standing on the stage. And I had a solo performance. They gave me a big doll into my hands, and I was looking at the doll and singing a lullaby to the doll. And I was singing a Yiddish songs, that der Tate wird vorn in Dorf, wird bringen a Nissele, wird sein gesund ein Fissele. And the next one was something else with a Keppele, mit an Äppele. And suddenly I see my father telling Äppele, Keppele, because he was afraid that I won't remember the words. And I remembered, I think I could just see it with my eyes. So I put away the doll and I said, Papa, you ken the Wörter. I know the words. You don't have to do that. Can you imagine the applause I got? The whole hall was so happy with my performance that I just stood there and I didn't know what to do. Do I continue singing or do I just bow to the applause? And I decided to bow to the applause, and that was my first performance, which I can remember. I arrived in Melbourne in 1950. When we arrived, they told us, we have to take you to the Kadimah. That's where Jewish people who arrive from all different places are gathering. Whenever we heard that a Jewish play was on, that was a great sensation. We ran there and we enjoyed every little bit. My mother was very close to the family Waislitz, to Jankiew and his wife. Waislitz was always nagging me. Every time I met him, he said, Nunu, when are you coming? When are you going to be with us? Then came a time when I decided, right, I'm going and joining the David Herman Theatre Group. He just somehow trusted me with such beautiful parts. I don't know if I really deserved it, but I think he just loved my Yiddish. Waislitz loved theater, but the main thing was Waislitz loved Yiddish, everything about Yiddish. The sound of Yiddish, the pronunciation of every word. But he never had the problems with me. I was doing exactly what he told me. Zygmunt Brustmann, he was doing our makeup for us. And the dibuk, he had to put dozens of wigs on the man. And for me, he used to put on plaits. Every play, I had to have some long plaits. And he was a real magician. He really did it so beautifully. His daughter was playing with us, Stella. And he was only worried if she was doing the right thing.
Stella spoke very well Yiddish. And Stella was very beautiful. But she finished so bad. That breaks my heart to think about it.
There were 3 plays that I had to jump in the last minute because Stella was supposed to be playing it, because she said if she doesn't play, she would do something terrible to herself. She wasn't well already then. Back Lane Center, Reusen, and what was the other one? Lucky Strike. I remember Weislitz's wife. She came and babysat for me while I sat and learned my lines. When I look at the album and look at the plays, each of the plays with Holzer, I seem to remember that I was laughing half the time. And with Waislitz directing it, it didn't happen.
My first recollection of my art was not in the theatre, It was of an incident at a home that she was living in Canterbury with her husband, and one day I was in the garden walking backwards and fell over a box of apples and broke my wrist. I think my mother must have been inside. She was out, Rachel was outside. She rushed towards me, calmed me down, and ultimately I ended up going off to hospital. That's my first recollection, which has nothing at all to do with the Yiddish theatre. My first recollection of her in the Yiddish theatre was, I think, at the Kadimah. Not knowing Yiddish, all I could do, and I was probably no more than 8 years old then, was to listen and be mesmerised, actually. She was, in every sense, a dramatic actress. She performed with drama. She used her body beautifully. But when it came to human emotions, that she didn't express them strongly. I could not say that she expressed them strongly. I think that probably was part of her character. She held back.
Mein Kind, ich will dir sagen, Alexander bleibt.
Yiddish was not spoken at home by my grandparents, and Rachel learnt Yiddish after she left home. I believe there was a reluctance on her part to step outside the Yiddish stage. To what extent she may have been discouraged by her husband, Chaim Rosenstein, who was her manager, I don't know. He was a strong character, and she basically did everything that he wanted her to do. He managed her in every regard.
She played in one play at the Princess Theatre, and I think the English theatre lost a big actress. I had a burning ambition to join the theatre, become an actress. And when I finished school, there was a guy who came from Russia, and he started a theatre school. And he had amazing teachers there, and Rachel Holzer was one of the teachers. And I became friends with her. I was the only Jewish girl in the school. And then she suggested to me that she'd like me to join the Yiddish theatre. I said, I don't know any Yiddish. She said, doesn't matter, you'll learn. And we became lifelong friends. The name that I used in the theatre, which was my maiden name, was Paula Kochen. Sometimes the Paula became Perl, and sometimes it even became Penina. I think it depended on the play that I was in. I just wrote the Yiddish in English letters, and that's how I read all my plays. I was born in Germany, and in 1939, my sisters and my mother, we came to Australia. And my mother had to find a job. She could not look after 3 children. So my younger sister and I were sent to Larino, which was run by the Jewish Welfare Society. And I was there for 8 years. While I was in the home, we did all sorts of plays. And I think the germ of being in the theatre started there. I knew very little about Rachel Holzer. I mean, I had been to the Yiddish theatre a couple of times previously, but I knew that she was directing plays there, and I was thrilled that she invited me to come and play with her. And right from the beginning, I think I recognized what she was and how great she was. That to me stayed with me my whole life with her in the right to the end. Personally, as an actor, I think Waislitz was, what you'd say, old-fashioned. He was a bit of a ham, in my opinion, anyway. He overacted. And that was the difference between him and Rochel, who was, if you can say underacting, I don't think there's such a word, but very plain and without any histrionics to it.
She would never impose her values on others. Why she didn't have children, I honestly don't know. It was a definite choice. It was no secret, or she didn't make it a secret, that she'd had a number of abortions. I don't know whether they're all with her husband.
Rochel Holzer, a young actress with Ida Kaminska's company, plays a village maid who becomes pregnant. Disowned by her father, the unhappy young woman abandons her infant daughter, and as the town is evacuated before the Russian advance flees, Jigen and Schumacher recover the baby and bring her with them to Warsaw, where they deposit her in an orphanage.
Oi, er war dahinter geworfen. Oi, wei. Oi, wei.
Hintergeworfen. Und was hat jetzt da?
Warum ist der Wahl mitnehmen?
She really looked upon me as her daughter. I think she started calling me mein Tochterl fairly soon after I started in the theatre. Man hat sich ausgelebt. You enrich your life. That's what it is. It was an enrichment of my life. First of all, Jascha Schur was in the theatre, and if you're with Jascha, you can't stop laughing. I couldn't anyway. He just had to look at you in a funny sort of way, and I used to burst out laughing. And he knew that. And I still miss his funny jokes. And so it was a time of laughter for me, really, the theatre.
Jascha Schur would always pick a time to be jovial and make you laugh a second before you went on stage. And I remember one particular time that really made me laugh, and he was standing behind me in the wings, and he was massaging my neck. And I said, "Oh, that feels good." And he said, "Well, I finished with your back. Would you turn around now?" And I just burst out laughing.
I take the knife and sharpen my pencil.
Like pencil, Papa.
Oh, there you go. Look at that. Is that dust?
I'm Ruth Freed.
I'm Noemi Jacobson.
And this is Jascha Schur.
And we're his daughters.
At parties, he was usually the MC. He was the one that led the frivolity. My parents came from Riga, arriving in Australia in July 1939. So from that time on, Dad immediately found the theatre, and as the story goes, he was at rehearsals that night.
As soon as he got off the ship.
Those pictures here, right at the very beginning of the album, are from 1930. Yes.
Was he a professional actor or was he an amateur?
Very much amateur. If he was professional, he might have made some
money.
Amateur.
Very much an amateur. He had a job during the day. In Riga, he was trained as a textile worker by his cousin. And once he came to Melbourne, he worked as a manager in a hosiery mill for many years.
And then he went out on his own and wasn't very successful. He was not a businessman.
He was not a businessman. His life was theatre.
Mum was home with us, but Dad was always away at rehearsals. So, yeah.
She felt alone.
Yes. At the beginning, she used to, complain, but then became involved.
When I was a kid growing up, my father wasn't home a lot. I remember as a kid I learnt two key words in terms of where my father was going to be. It was either a Sitzung, which is meeting, or Probe, which is rehearsal, and he was either one or the other. My mother's involvement with the Kadimah was a test in some ways. He shared his relationship with her, unfortunately, with the theatre. We had a very small home when I was a child. We lived in a dwelling in Glenira Road behind Teagle's Continental Delicatessen, which was really just a front for my father's nighttime activities, being on the stage and behind it. Quite often my mother would walk around our not particularly substantial home looking for things, looking for vases, looking for tea towels, tablecloths. And, it could be several months later, she's sitting in the theatre watching a play and it's like, oh, there it is. So there's the tablecloth.
With the theatre crowd, it was...
They used to come to our place.
Family, yeah.
Rachel Levita, Leah Zucker, the T-Girls. Yeah.
The Levins.
Helen Jacobs.
Who else?
They were probably the closest. But then we also had Aaron Gurvich, who was an artist, and he did all the backdrops and all the
scenery.
And they were Mum and Dad's best friends. They came together from Riga. We lived only 3-4 doors down from the Gurviches, as I said, and Aaron Gurvich looked very much like Dad, the same white hair, a bit more handsome, and everyone thought they were brothers. All of this group that we said that all lived together in Carlton, there's 7 couples or 6 couples, they did everything for each other. They babysat for each other. They borrowed money, and that money that they didn't have, they gave to each other.
To go to the movies, the husband from one couple and the wife from the other couple would go because somebody had to stay home and babysit. My father went to a movie with Schlummer Schur, and Yasha stayed home to babysit his daughters, and Mum stayed home because she was heavily pregnant with me. Gott hat geholfen, and Yasha had to end up taking my mother to the hospital. And when they arrived, and who are you? I'm the boyfriend, he'd say. And where's the husband? In the army. So it was a magic connection.
My father never took any credit for my ability and what I have done with my life. And whenever I tried to thank him that he was the springboard, he never accepted that. And it just speaks about his humility, that he never saw himself as an artist. He saw himself as a tradesperson doing a job. When I was growing up in Princes Hill, my father painted a mural in the bathroom which was of fish in profile, and they were blue. And it was just a way to try and introduce a bit of Stimmung, a bit of mood into a single-fronted terrace. That became something that I was doing without realising where it had come from. So I alluded to that to my father in his later years, and I said, these images come from the mural in Pigden Street. And he said, no, mine was a stencil, yours is art. I still do fish in profiles swimming through the sky.
Yes, really everything to do with the artwork for the David Herman Theatre Dad was involved in. Posters would have been the first thing to advertise the production, and then you needed programs, sometimes even the ticketing if they wanted to do something special with the ticketing. And then, of course, the main hard work would have been for him doing the sets.
I remember the scenery which he had for the Gräfen vom Palaz. I'll never forget that. That was a beautiful piece of art. The wall was like moving away and the girl was coming out from under that wall which she had built was beautiful.
When we were clearing out Dad's garage, when we had to, this is what we came across, and it's the backdrop to one of the plays that Dad must have decided he was going to salvage this time.
I remember going with Papa to the Kadimah and watching him painting the decorazios. And he was so immersed in this different world of art. He forgot all his worries, his guilt that he had survived the war, whereas the rest of his family had perished. They were meant to come out a year after us, once we'd settled in. And he'd often, I remember, sit and just stare up into the sky, and he'd forget all of that, lost in his world of art and painting, and he painted so beautifully with such neshama.
I kept painting a boy looking up to the heavens, and then one day I realised that the boy was me, and the quest has been to how to express happiness, because so few people do that.
I remember going to the Gurviches, to the Schurs, to the Gilligiches. Yes, it was a lovely time, a close time, but it wasn't so good for my parents. I remember my mother's wails when they told her what had happened in Poland. Somebody had heard. She always felt guilty that she'd survived. There was always a sadness there. And the theatre made her come to life. Our lives revolved around Kadimah and the David Herman Theatre.
I was born in Łódź, Poland, in 1949, and the first 10 years of my life was spent there. A very happy childhood. It's where I learned Yiddish, which was also the language of my parents at home. And I came to Australia in 1959 with them as a migrant, of course, in that wave of migration out of Poland. Well, in those days, Jacob Waislitz, Jacob Waislitz, the well-known actor and director, was still the personality of the theatre, but he was aging. Gradually, it was the second generation of that period. Yasha Schur became a very popular, much loved personality of the theatre, and the audience used to clap as soon as he came on stage. Shia Tiggle was seen as the workhorse, the steady, good performing actor. Maya Tseprov, the diminutive Koppel, as they called him, which was one of his roles that stuck to his name forever. They were the kind of trio that really made an impression.
Maya Tseprov came out from after the war. I only discovered that later, that he was in Auschwitz. He never talked about that. And he took on all sorts of parts, character parts, really. And he was very, very good. He was a tailor. And but that's when he became alive, being in the theatre and playing.
So this is black and white of one of the plays. And it's, who is this, Mum?
Tseprov.
Okay.
Tseprov was he was in every play. He was a great man. The joke about Tseprov that he used to say, my wife says that even though I'm very, very short, I'm a big man. I was born in Russia, 1945, and arrived in Poland in 1946. I did have an auntie in Melbourne, apparently. So we finished in Australia, being invited by her family. And that was Ida Lustig. And she was a performer back from Russia. She was a singer. And she even put out a record, I think, back in Russia. So she was in every play. She had to be in every play. Couldn't be without Ida. Ida was always very strict with herself and with others' conduct.
I remember getting ticked off by Ida.
There you are.
Yeah.
So I remember well.
Yeah. was...
So that was Ida, very feisty.
The other people in the theatre, though, that were like behind the scenes, like the guy that did all the sets and the stages, and Lova, who was the stage manager.
Yes,
he was there for he was there for everything and all the time. I even remember one time we took the play to Sydney, and Lova was unwell. And I remember seeing him lying on a row of chairs behind the stage, just willing himself to be better so that he could pull the curtain. There's me and Mum. We were playing the same age in that play, which was pretty cool.
Soon we'll be able to do it again.
Yeah, probably.
No, but this is a very telling photo, this one here, because there's so many people. I don't remember the occasion. It was done here in the front room. We were just like a family. We spoke, we joked, we gave each other lifts. We had weekends together sometimes. Rachelka Levita stands out in my mind. I have no idea what she was, whether she was a Zionist or Bundist or whatever, but she was a wonderful, wonderful person. She was my mentor and my tutor. She made me feel comfortable in my own skin, so to speak, because it's not very easy when you're not an experienced actor to actually behave naturally. And she was one of the people that could take it out of me, that could actually do it, more so than the director, because the director was a stranger.
I'm the daughter of Rachel Levita, fondly remembered as Rochel.
And I'm the granddaughter, and to me, she was always Nana.
She started acting in 1939 until 1992. And she was in approximately 30 productions.
We would all be like, we're going to Nana's play, and we understood Nana couldn't maybe be somewhere, but it's because she's been practicing and it was completely fine. That was her career. Well, we saw it as a career. It's not a paid career, but it's a career, and it's a career of love. She had a really, really small unit, we would say, and I would be so lucky to go there in the evenings, and easily 3 nights a week, all the cast members would be there, the writers would be there, painters would be there, producers would be there, and they'd be there beforehand or after a play. And it'd be, after a play, they'd be critiquing themselves. Before the play, it'd be like, what's our message? What do we want to get across? And who needs to do what? And she'd have a table full of food, and it was just full of love and warmth. As a child, I'd go in and they'd be like my adopted aunties and uncles from a whole other world that I just felt so lucky to get a glimpse into.
Meine Gefühle sind enttäuscht. Sie meinten dann alle, als mein Herz ist von Stein und ich, Shylock, von den Menschen Leut nicht verstehen.
I would never call them amateurs. I'd be fearful to. They were professionals by all means. I even can recall evenings when they'd be at the table and they'd be discussing what play should we bring to Melbourne next. And, they'd get very fiery conversations. It'd be like, you'd have to hear everybody's opinion, and everybody's opinion would matter. Every time they brought producers from overseas, it was like such a big coup for them, and to entertain them here in Melbourne, but to also show someone from overseas, you're doing these big productions in America and Israel, but look what this cohort can achieve. And for her, acting was from the soul. She always said that acting, dancing, painting, anything like that, it's all for the neshama, for the soul. She had a beautiful album she made of her family who passed in the Shoah that was by her bedside her entire lifetime, and she would just go through page by page before she went to sleep. And it was her sort of reckoning in her mind of, I've had a good day, I've completed the day, but you're by my side.
By 1968, after many heated discussions and a long struggle, the Kadimah Cultural Centre, and with it the David Herman Theatre Group, moved across the river to the Esquire Cinema in Elsternwick. A second era with a different tone, the injection of some new blood and visiting overseas directors began and continued until 1992, when the final performance took place.
For Mum, it was devastating to know that In Huts from Tel Aviv was going to be the last play. I would guess that both between Mum and Dad, they would have been in 20 productions between them.
If you're to talk about the furniture of David Herman Theatre and the names that were always there but possibly didn't get the accolades, there was characters like Hannah Light, Vigushin and Schwartz were also, bit players often, but they had a presence about them. It was the carpenters. It was the people that helped behind the stage. They were always there. I do remember in my late teens that the people that I was starting to work with in theatre, the ones that were up to 10 years older than me, like Charles Sluky and Isaac Appel and Faye Mokoto, I feel that they felt more supported by my father than anyone else in the theatre. As sort of the 70s came to an end, he felt that the Zukunft, the future of Yiddish theatre, lay with some of these new people.
A number of Skiff and Zukunft people acted in the first play that Faye Mokoto directed in 1970, was The Megillah by Itzik Munger, and that was the sort of seed.
The Melbourne Yiddish Youth Theatre, Melbourne Jiddische Jugendtheater, really came in on the wave of the new theatre movement that was happening particularly in Melbourne. And we wanted to perform more contemporary, interesting, exciting theatre, even though David Herman started performing these light, fluffy comedies. That wasn't our idea of good theatre at all. We still felt duty-bound to help out and to keep that flame of Yiddish theatre going. One of the really big, old-time, if you like, productions was Die Kischefmachern. For this production, I think it was in '74, they brought out a very well-known Yiddish actress from America, and previously she had a career in Poland. And Dina Halpern was her name. She was a grande dame of the Yiddish theatre, and she directed and starred. The local actors had prominent roles, and they also recruited a few of us from the youth theatre to play minor roles.
The youth group were interested in more modern plays and were particularly interested in plays that weren't necessarily written by Yiddish playwrights, and because they were being translated by my mother, Dopke, on a regular basis, she was keen, and the theatre group was keen to actually perform those plays. Arthur Miller's The Price and The Sunshine Boys, for example. Diary of Anne Frank.
Yes, The Diary of Anne Frank.
We did do one play in the old genre, the Zweimal 100.000, the Shalom Aleichem play. The Price really in 1974 after that, with Isaac, myself, and Leon Griffenberg and Faye Mokoto as the actors. A group of us and the behind-the-scenes people who helped us out. We constituted ourselves as the Melbourne Yiddish Youth Theatre, and there was a bit of a struggle after that because the Kadimah was supporting us very strongly, and they definitely wanted the title to be changed to the Melbourne Yiddish Youth Theatre bei der Kadimah, at the Kadimah. So they wanted to have their 10 cents worth of that, and I think it was appropriate and good at the time.
Yeah, good close-ups there. Yeah, that's good.
The last 2 or 3 performances of the Melbourne Yiddish Youth Theatre, we'd already started that migration from a pure Yiddish play like the Megillah and the Sunshine Boys and Diary of Anne Frank to being more hybrid.
Plus what we discussed earlier, surtitles. Just a fabulous way in which you can attract people who have an interest but shy away when they know it's just a pure Yiddish performance.
Tonight, let's have a good time.
There's a revitalisation, not only in this town, but all over the world, of younger people who are interested in Yiddish literature and Yiddish theatre. And there's quite active Yiddish performances. And in New York, Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish can play to sold-out audiences, and it's been very successful and was coming to Melbourne but for the pandemic. Yeah. That finger that I'm using now, that one, that's what Waislitz used to do. He used his pointer just like that.
And again.
Yes.
In 2012, the David Herman Theatre space was created to pay tribute to the Yiddish theatre that was once located there.
Bei Schneider in Kamore, viel mit Kinder, keine Haare. Kinder, pitzelig wie Moon, steht der Wiegeläube nun. Jetzt da, Hauptsache die Meise, nicht für'n Ziegelerchen Weiße, nur a Meise, für'n a Mantel, für'n a Tinkling Gewantel. Hat man aufgenäht a Mantel für'n a Tinkling Gewantel, für'n Elzenbucher, Schmuel. Soll können gehen in Schule. Geht im schmullig Juren 3, ist der Mantel spugelnei. Geht in ihm noch ein Jahr, ist der Mantel schöner Gur. Einmal, schmullig Titten nun, ist der Mantel kurz und stun. No, es passt durchs Gesindel, soll schon gehen in Mantel Hindel. Geht im Hindel Juren 3, ist der Mantel spugelnei. Geht sie in ihm noch ein Jahr, fehlt dem Mantel nicht kein Uhr. It was always packed. The theatre was packed.